In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. During the week, the head of the Defence Force, General Angus Campbell, told graduating female cadets that the way to avoid sexual assault was to follow the 4 A's. To avoid excessive alcohol consumption, not to stay out after midnight, not to be alone, and not to look too attractive. During the same week, Australian of the Year Grace Tame gave an extraordinary speech. If you didn't hear it, go onto iView and see if you can chase it up. An extraordinary speech in the National Press Club, where she was asked to comment on the Prime Minister's words when he said that in order to understand the Brittany Higgins assault, he needed to be really told by Jen that he needed to think like a father. Ms Tame articulated very clearly that you don't need to have children to have a conscience, and having children doesn't necessarily guarantee a conscience. Coming soon after the Brittany Higgins allegations came further revelations about another sexual assault allegedly committed by our nation's chief law officer while at university. Tragically, the woman making the claims took her life last year, therefore ending any possibility of criminal action. However, the Prime Minister is refusing to test the evidence before an independent inquiry. In a private conversation between the Prime Minister and the Attorney General categorically denied the allegations, and the Prime Minister is now satisfied and wants us all to move on. One of the many valid criticisms against the Church made by the Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Child Sexual Abuse was that the Church had a culture of mates looking after mates. Father Chris reminded us very helpfully last week that a definition of culture is simply the way we do things around here. Clearly, there has been and continues to be a toxic culture problem in our Parliament. Julia Gillard named it when addressing the then opposition leader Tony Abbott on the floor of Parliament in 2012, and she named it as misogyny. Now, this should not surprise us, because our politicians are our representatives. They mirror us. They mirror the same toxic culture problem that also exists in our wider society. Yes, we need to deal with what's going on in Parliament, but ultimately we need to deal with what's going on in our own homes and workplaces and society. When Jesus turns the table over in the temple, he was highlighting a number of cultural problems in that institution. Spiritual abuse and corruption were how they did things around the temple. The Royal Commission overturned the tables in the church. But when will we turn the tables of abuse and power that leads to sexual assault in our Parliament, in our workplaces, and in our homes? Jesus turned the table on the way men thought about women in the first century. A classic example of this story is of the woman accused of adultery. The woman who comes to Jesus and is being pursued by a whole heap of men with stones to stone her to death. Jesus turns to the men and says, "Let the one who is without sin cast the first stone." And the men silently slink away. What Jesus does there is he shifts the shame that has been piled upon this woman, and moves it to the men wishing to scapegoat her by stoning her to death. When a woman anoints Jesus' feet with expensive oil and washes them with her tears and dries them with her hair, the men in that gathering shame her. But in that story, Jesus shifts the shame. He says to Simon the Pharisee, "Do you see this woman? I came into your house and you did not even give me water for my feet. But she has washed my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but she has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet." Now, if you think that's all a bit patriarchal and sexist, let me remind you that of the thousands of things that Jesus could have said and done, in the final hours of his life, what he does do is he offers this woman's example as a model of turned over tables, as something to be emulated, as something that men should do also, and serve one another. Jesus acknowledges this woman's leadership, and he takes a bowl of water and washes the disciples' feet. When Peter objects, clinging to the old patriarchal model of power and shame and all of those things, Jesus says to Peter, "Peter, unless you allow the tables to be turned," I'm paraphrasing here, of course, but unless you allow the tables to be turned in your heart, you cannot be part of this kingdom movement, nor can you claim to be one of my disciples. For Peter, Jesus' washing people's feet was shameful. But Jesus shifts the shame to those who refuse to be servants of others. Time and time again in the gospel stories, in the midst of a shame-honour culture, Jesus shifts shame from where it doesn't belong to where it does belong. In her Australian of the Year acceptance speech, Grace Thames said that we need to shift the shame from the survivor of sexual abuse onto the perpetrator. That's what Jesus does. Jesus never stops turning over the tables. And that's what we need to do. Courageous women like Grace Tame and Brittany Higgins are turning over our tables. We need to not only turn the tables on the shame, but also on the responsibility. Women are not responsible for their abuse. No matter what they wear, no matter how much they drink, no matter whether they walk alone through a park at night, they are not responsible for their abuse. Despite what General Campbell says, the responsibility always lays with the abuser. As Australian journalist Amy Renkes said last week, the only thing that happened to these women is that they came across the path of a sexual assaulter. We need to turn the tables. Women are marching in Canberra and around the nation on the 15th of March, protesting these very issues. They, like Jesus, are angry. They've had enough. They want to be heard, and they must be heard. But women should not have to organise marches against their own abuse. It's us men who should be organising the marches, having deeply listened to the women. It is us men who should be turning the tables on male behaviour. Men should be marching not just because when men diminish women, men are diminished as well. But because no human being should be diminished. This is ultimately a human issue. We need to turn the tables. We need more funding, more support services for women who have been abused. But we also need more support services for men who are potential abusers. To educate, to illuminate, to change the culture, to turn the tables. Men hold the majority of political power in making these funding decisions. And until we have equal numbers of women in political power, the tables will never be turned. Men need to be empowered to say to other men, without fear of exclusion, "Mate, that's not funny. That joke's not funny. Mate, that's not how we talk about women. It's not okay. That's not how we do things around here." That's how we turn the tables. Jesus turned the tables on the culture of the temple. It is long past time that we turn the tables on the culture of the abuse of power by men over women. This is not in that sense, a woman's problem. It is a man's problem, and men need to take responsibility. A man showed us the way 2,000 years ago, and it's about time we started following his example and adopting his same passion and conviction for the placing the shame where it belongs, on the perpetrator and not on the survivor. When it comes to overturning these tables, it is in our hands. The Lord be with you.